Hello and welcome back to After the Anime. We are going to get into the second part of what happens after the Hunter x Hunter anime. But before we do, I just wanted to do a quick thank you for all of your kind words on the last video. It really does mean a lot to me and I really appreciate it. So to catch you up, in the last video we learned that Beyond Netero was taking the Kakin Empire and its princes to the Dark Continent. We learned that Jing and Periston had quit the Zodiacs in favor of becoming part of Beyond's team. And Beyond Netero turned himself into the Zodiacs and let himself be arrested so that they could all go to the Dark Continent together. And now let's see where this takes us next. Alright, so we get things started right away with Leorio. He's back! And Cheadle is actually on the phone with him, asking him to become a member of the Zodiacs. And she gives him a lot of respect here, saying that you are currently the most respected hunter in the association. Which for Leorio, that's crazy. It must have been his, heartfelt pouring out for help for Gon, and the other thing. And so she asks him to become part of the Zodiacs because they're going to have a mission, which we know to be the trip to the Dark Continent, that they're going to need his help with. And initially, Leorio's kind of hesitant. He's like, I kind of got things going on, which we know is him wanting to become a doctor and going to school for that. And Cheadle kind of stops him, like, I hope this isn't too presumptuous, but I actually already called your school. And they agreed to let you come on and do some study abroad with us. Which study abroad to the Dark Continent is not the first thing I think of. So she's like, you can go on this mission with us, finish your studies while you're doing it, and I'll be your advisor. So she tells him, this is going to be a dangerous mission. If you refuse, that's okay, I totally get it. And to which Leorio turns on his little charm button and is like, well, in that case, I refuse. Because this is such a good opportunity that I should be asking you. He's like, please let me go. Which, wins her over, and Cheadle's like, sure, thank you. But Leorio does have one last request. He says, I know there's another opening, and I have someone that I'd like to recommend. So we cut to Jing and Periston having their conversation, and Jing and Periston are very similar in that they like to play games, and so they kind of beat around the bush and are pretty cryptic in the way they're talking, kind of like, oh, this is what you're thinking, no, but this is what you're thinking. So I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible while still giving you all the information. So Jing kind of accuses Periston here of saying that you would let these Chimera ants loose because Cheadle is going to make the Hunters Association do boring things, and that's the last thing you want. And he starts to talk about what Netero would do in this situation, which Periston raises his voice for the first time, and one of the only times really I think he raises his voice. He's like, Netero would never do that. He'd never do what Cheadle is doing. He'd accept losing the V5 as a client and not accompany Beyond. He'd find a way to get there first, challenge Beyond on the Dark Continent, and have a fight over there, and just basically kind of shows that Periston really had some strong feelings for Isaac Netero and really valued how he was running the Hunters Association. And Jing picks up on this, is like, you love this Hunters Association so much. Why are you trying to destroy it? He says, that's a twisted form of love. And to this, Periston says, you and I are similar, Jing. We think in very unorthodox ways, which Jing kind of takes offense to. But it's true. They both have kind of a selfish, high-level gaming of the system type mentality. And here, Periston basically admits to being a psychopath. He says, people feel happiness through love. Well, I feel happiness when people hate me. I want to hurt things that are dear to me. And at this point, one of Beyond's men kind of tries to butt in on Jing and say, who do you think you are? And Jing instantly grabs him, and we see him rain punches down on this guy. And then the next instant, we see him unharmed, with Jing's fist right in front of his face. So it seems like one of those projection things, kind of like we saw with Killua in the Heavens Arena. And Jing basically tells him, got it? Stay out of this. And so Jing starts looking around. He's trying to figure out who's in charge here, who's under Beyond Netero. And he's looking at people with, big auras and things like that. And Periston speaks up. He's like, oh, come on, Jing, I'm number 2, of course. And Jing takes a jab at him. He's like, well, I guess it's not about strength then, so we'll just have to go about this a different way. And he tells everybody, I'm number 2 now. Anybody got a problem with that? So Jing wants to insert himself here in charge of all of Beyond's men. We then cut to this nice office that's got a receptionist and some muscle out front, and Mezaistem enters, and he asks, is Kurapika here? And the receptionist is just like, no, now you need to leave. But Mezaistem's not having any of that. He says, I'll wait for him to get here. You got any coffee? I'll get the milk myself. Which he's a cow guy. I guess the insinuation he carries milk around with him is just hilarious. But then the muscle shows up, kind of to escort him out. And so now we get our first look at Mezaistem's Nen ability. He puts up this card with an exclamation point. He tells them, "This is a warning. Don't come near me," which seems to be kind of an activation need for his Nen ability. And of course they ignore that, and the muscle comes at him, and he flips the card around to the X and he says, "Restrain," and immediately they can't move. All of these bodyguards are frozen in place, and we learn that this is Mezaistem's move called Cross Game. And it's kind of funny. Mezaistem just, takes his seat, lets them stay there, and says, "Don't worry, you'll be released soon. But here's another warning." He puts up another card. It says, "Don't take another step. I can do this all day." And so at this point, the receptionist is like, "Okay, fine. The boss is downstairs, but he's in a bad mood, so be careful." But Kurapika had apparently heard the ruckus that's going on upstairs and comes up on his own. And we see Kurapika looking slick, honestly, in this nice suit. And he turns to Mezaistem, really blunt, "Who are you? What do you want?" So Mezaistem introduces himself, says, "Leorio told me about you. Will you go to the Dark Continent with us?" And Kurapika's not having any of it. He just says, "No, is that it? I've got stuff to do." Now, Mezaistem, he's been around the block a couple times. He's a high-ranking member of the Zodiacs. He knows what to do here. He says, "I hear you're looking for the scarlet eyes of your murdered friends." And then Kurapika completely changes. We get his scarlet eyes, this amazing look on his face, and he gets super intense, tells Mezaistem, "From this point on, choose your words wisely. Yeah, I'm looking for these eyes. What of it?" And so we learn that Kurapika's been looking for this set of eyes that showed up on the dark web about 6 months ago, haven't had any leads, and Mezaistem tells him, "We found out who owns these eyes." And I'm not surprised you couldn't find them, it was just pure coincidence. We were screening people with background checks for people going to the Dark Continent, and we found out the owner of these scarlet eyes. Unfortunately, that's all I can tell you, because you're not a member of the Zodiacs. If you want to know more, you gotta agree to become part of the Zodiacs and go to the Dark Continent with us. So Kurapika thinks to himself, I'm going to do this by any means necessary. He says, "Yes, I'll join the Zodiacs. I'll go with you. Now, can you tell me who it is?" So Mezaistem shows him this picture, and it's the fourth prince of the Kakian Empire, Saraidnik. And we only get a brief look at him here, but you're not going to want to forget about him because he's going to be a very important character going forward. So we pick right back up with Kurapika in the next chapter, and he's in his basement with all of these scarlet eyes that he's collected, and he's thinking about all the different kinds of people he's got them from: a teacher, a priest, a swindler, a politician, and now he's going to get them from a king's son. And we find out these are actually the last set of eyes that he needs to get all of them back. And he's kind of thinking to himself, what am I going to do when I'm done? I'll have all these eyes, but I'll have no home to go back to. There's no one there waiting for me. I have nothing left. Just a really sad, brooding moment for Kurapika. And then we cut to what's going to be the main focus of this chapter, which is Jing at Beyond's palace trying to convince these men to let him be their number 2. And they basically tell him, Pariston brings a plan and he brings order. What do you bring to this? Why should you be our number 2? If you're just going to bring chaos, we're going to have to get rid of you. And they actually get ready to fight. They, release their Ren and they're assuming some fighting stances. So Jing just puts up 2 fingers and says, "I'll pay you twice what Beyond offered, up front. Everything else can stay the same. I won't do anything else. I don't have any other conditions. You can even keep following Pariston's orders. It doesn't matter to me. But I'm number 2 in charge. That's non-negotiable." To which everyone is kind of puzzled. What's the point then? You're just gonna be number 2 for no apparent reason and give us a ton of money? Jing says, "Yeah, just give me your account number and I'll do it right now." Or don't, because that would be a condition, and there's no conditions. You can wait however long you want. Whenever you decide that you're okay with me being number 2, give me your account number and I'll give you the money. And so Jing turns to Pariston and asks, "You don't object to this?" And Pariston says, "No, I think it'd be great if you were number 2. And so Jing says, "I'll ask for your account number anyway, but if my math is correct, 2 times 0 is still 0. And they exchange this little heated glare with each other before Pariston cheerily says, "Nope, yep, you're right." Which is just so Pariston. He's doing all of this for no money. It's just because Pariston has this need to be entertained and do something interesting. We then cut to this little exchange that just serves to let us know that Kurapika's on his way to the Hunters Association with Mezaistum, and Leorio's also nagging him about not answering his phone. And he asks Kurapika to hurry because he doesn't know anyone there. Mezaistum also tells Kurapika that, you can prioritize your personal business once you're on board. Just don't let things get messy. I mean, this is a prince we're talking about here. Then Kurapika pulls out his cool guy line. He says, "I'm better at handling monsters in human skin than handling the unknown." And then we get our first look again at Gon, who's looking at his hands and says, "I can't make any aura." And then we move on. We just get this ultimate little one-frame tease of Gon. But don't worry, he's coming back later in this video. So we go back to Jing, who's actually sitting down and just kind of giving a lesson on the Dark Continent to all of Beyond's men. And we get some more really good world building here. He kind of goes over the threats, the 5 threats that were brought back by the Dark Continent, mostly stuff we already know, but he clarifies that the guide makes people take these threats back to teach them a lesson, and he kind of brings more credibility to these threats and says that we're lucky humanity hasn't been wiped out by the threats we've already brought back yet. And so Beyond's men ask kind of what we all want to know is like, well, what makes it worth it? Why risk all of this? There's got to be something over there that we would want. And that's where Jing starts to list all these resources that people want from these Dark Continent trips. He tells us about the unmanned rock, which is an ore that generates electricity when placed underwater, which you can imagine the value in that for city building and just society in general. But that one is guarded by Pap. We have an herb that's known to cure all kinds of diseases, but that's in an ancient labyrinth city that's inside an even larger forest, and that's guarded by Brionne. Then we have the nitro rice, which is the secret to ultimate longevity. Basically lets you live forever. But the expedition that went for that ran into Hellbell before they even got there. And then we have the Trinity elixir, which we don't really understand what it does. It's described as the mother solution to all liquids, but I'm not exactly even sure what that entails. And the expedition that went for that got into a fight with Ai. He then tells them that Beyond's dad, Isaac Netero, went on an undocumented trip to the Dark Continent with his friends. And when he went there, he said that the place was just too big. And we get some amazing art here of the Dark Continent. I mean, look at this. Look at the size of the trees. This gives us our best look at the Dark Continent we've had so far, and it's amazing. We also get a shot of young Isaac Netero and his friends that went with him, including Zig Zoldyck. So Isaac went with a member of the Zoldyck family, which we already knew he was friends with Nero. We've never run into Zig before, but it's interesting here that there's another member of the Zoldyck family now. We then get Lene Hors d'oeuvre, which I won't be surprised if you don't remember her, but we did actually see her in the chairman election arc, although I don't think she said anything. He then tells them about the last trip, which Beyond took to bring back an alchemy plant called Metallion, and they actually did bring it back, but by going off route, they caught the zombie disease, and then when they got back, the plant had died. And so Curly, who seems to be the information guy on Beyond's team, kind of brings up, it sounds like all these expeditions that went out to get these things, they knew what they were looking for, suggesting that someone's been here before, right? Was there a pioneer that we just don't know about? And Jing says, yeah, there's idiots in any era. There was one guy who tried to explore the entire Mobius shoreline by himself 300 years ago, and he wrote the book Journey to the New World, East and West editions about it. But only the East edition has been found, no sign of the West edition. And Jing gives us 3 reasons why he thinks this is that we haven't found the other book. 1, it either hasn't been found yet, 2, he never wrote it, or 3, he is still writing it as we speak. And Curly puts 2 and 2 together, the longevity rice, the herbs that cure disease. Of course, he could still be out there living and writing about the Dark Continent. And then Jing drops the bomb that the book's author's name is Don Freaks. So there's another Freaks out there, presumably Jing's grandfather maybe, who's exploring the Dark Continent and writing all about it. And speaking of the Freaks, we get Gon again. He's giving his dad Jing a call because now he actually has a dad he can ask advice from. And he tells Jing, I can't produce any aura anymore. And Jing is trying to give him advice. He's like, well, no, you had aura when you were with me. You probably just can't see it anymore. Maybe you went back to being normal. And Jing speculates, it's probably because of that Nen curse that you put on yourself, and actually starts to give some fatherly advice for once, and says that, this is a good opportunity for you to figure out what you can do as you are now. And then we are treated with some absolutely heartwarming and wholesome scenes of Gon going back and seeing Mito, and they're, doing chores, making dinner, and it's just absolutely wonderful. And so Gon and Mito are sitting down for tea, and they're having this conversation about Jing, and Gon kind of describes it as, it didn't really feel like meeting my dad. I didn't feel like I needed to be with him just because he's my dad. Maybe if I had Nin, I would have been impressed by him, but I don't, so this is just kind of how I am now. And Mito's like, because of all that, I get to be with you now. Welcome back to reality. And then she slams down all these books and she's like, this is all the homework you missed. You need to do this, 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 and this. And you can imagine Gon's reaction to having to do all that homework. And so then we cut back to Jing, who's just come back into the palace after his phone call with Gon. And one of Beyond's men tells him that, we talked it over, and since Pariston's cool with it, we're fine with you being number 2. But not all of us are willing to accept the money yet, so we're not going to follow all your orders until we all agree. And he kind of puts this on for Jing. He's like, we're just temp hunters. We were hired through Pariston. We don't stand a chance against a starred hunter like you. And Jing sees right through this, and he's like, don't lie. You guys are all experts. He says, you've been planning this for a long time with Beyond. You were also the ones that helped keep Pariston the vice chairman so he could handle business in the Hunters Association. And he's just laying bare all the deception and all the planning that's gone through all this. And while he's doing this, Pariston is getting more and more annoyed. And he thinks to himself, we do think alike. Is that why I don't like him? I might hate someone for the first time in my life. And he even mentions he's looking forward to hating him. Remember what he said before? He said, I want to hurt things that are dear to me. And so now he says, I wonder what I want to do to someone that I hate. And so Jing notices, he's like, 10 of you can't be it. That can't be all of you. I bet there's at least 200 of you. So go tell all of the others, I'll pay them too. And we get Curly thinking to himself, Beyond promised to pay 1.5 billion to the 25 or so that are going to the Dark Continent and 200 million to all the alternates. So why is Jing paying 2 times as much just to be called number 2 with none of the power? And we're going to jump to where Cheadle is actually on the phone now with the V6. And the V6 is telling her, write up this contract for Beyond to sign. If he breaks it, tell him he'll spend the rest of his life in prison. And then he basically threatens them. He says if worse happens, if he gets out, he claims a discovery, your future won't be bright either. Now, it's not exactly clear whether he's saying Cheadle's future or the Hunters Association future, but regardless, he's laying out that, bad things are going to happen to you guys if you screw this up. So Cheadle gives Beyond this contract they wrote up, and Beyond is reading it. It basically says that he's going to be under constant surveillance, he's going to have a house arrest bracelet, essentially, and that any discoveries he finds are property of the V6. Beyond says that's reasonable, and he signs the contract. So now the Hunters Association can begin organizing this trip to the Dark Continent. And with that in mind, we cut to Kurapika driving again to the Hunters Association with Mezaistem. And Mezaistem asks him what he's going to do to the prince after he gets his eyes back. Kurapika tells him, I just want the eyes back. I'll yield to most demands. But what if he resists? And Kurapika says, 2 people already told me they'd rather die than hand them over, and I changed their minds without killing them. He doesn't exactly tell us how he does that, but he says, I'm confident the prince will be the same. So keep those words of Kurapika in mind, because we're going to jump back here to this rave that's going on. There's this man who spots these 2 party girls having a good time, and he convinces them to go with them to this hotel that's entirely owned by a prince. And they get to this lavish room, and 4th Prince Zereidnik is there, and he greets them, saying that he loves to hear from the people so he doesn't lose touch, and he invites them into this room for a drink. And time passes, and we wait, and then we hear this running water. And now Prince Zereidnik is on the phone, and he's complaining to his man that brought these women. He's like, Mark, my man, these women, they just cared about fashion and sex, and they'd never heard of all these artists, and he just starts listing off all this highbrow stuff. And he's like, at least ask them if they know the capital of the Kakian Empire or the name of the king or something. That's the bare minimum for being human. And we start to see this blood and hair going down the drain. And he says, if I'm skinning pigs and monkeys, it's just dissection. What I seek is art, produced by a youth with a future put into an extreme situation. He says, 2 more females, please. Chop, chop. Prince Rydnik murders and dismembers people for art. And that's who Kurapika's going to be going after now to get the eyes back. And so next time we'll find out more about how that goes and what's going on with Jing at Beyond's castle. So if you want to keep up with what happens next, be sure to hit subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have any questions or any comments or suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'd love to hear it. There's already some things that I know I'm going to keep working on, and I'm just going to keep doing my best, and we'll have a good time here. So thank you again for your time. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon. Adios.